The aid post was rocked by shell fire. Plaster rained down from a cracked ceiling beam. One blast destroyed a window, sending glass fragments, wood, and stone flying into the room. Fearing that the building would collapse, Father Francis L. Sampson hurried people beneath a bed. As he changed bandages and washed plaster dust off pale faces, he led everyone in the Lord's Prayer. He maintained the flow of blood plasma throughout. The 12 injured men gazed in wonder at the chaplain. He served as their guiding light in the shadow of death. As though he had been made for this purpose by Providence, his internal gyroscope spun true and level. In the upcoming months, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower would endorse Father Sampson's request for a Medal of Honor for his actions in Normandy. However, America's greatest battle award would never be given to the brave priest. The secret tale of the man and the medal is this. When Father Sampson responded to a request for paratrooper chaplains in 1942, the convoluted journey to the aid post began. Later on, he acknowledged his ignorance. After he realized what the term airborne meant, he refrained from resigning out of fear of embarrassment. To be honest, I had no idea when I signed up for the airborne that chaplains would be expected to jump from an airplane in flight. His chaplaincy did not allow him to be treated leniently at the Army's parachute school in Fort Benning, Georgia. Francis Leon Sampson, who was 30 years old, was 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed 185 pounds, and had a flat-top haircut. Despite his athletic prowess, the institution crushed him into a deflated heap. He nearly died when he fell into the Chattahoochee River on a single jump, but he persisted even after several of his fellow trainees washed out or wound up in a hospital bed. Unaware that his near miss in the river portended future events, he graduated in May 1943. Encouraged, the chaplain boarded a train headed for Camp McCall, North Carolina, where the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment was stationed. He answered to the regimental commander, Colonel Howard R. Johnson. The 40-year-old leader was a human dynamo that never stopped igniting things. With impassioned rhetoric, he urged his followers to shake the gates of hell and overcome insurmountable obstacles. Additionally, the clergyman considered the colonel's use of foul language insulting. He expressed his disdain, and tension grew between the two men. The priest and his flock of Catholic paratroopers clicked right away. The men who called him Father Sam were won over by his compassion, sense of humor, and love for everyone. For 2 months in the fall, the 501st engaged in simulated combat in Tennessee. Father Sam was given his captain's bars there. With his knowledge of how to place a splint, provide blood plasma, and carry out other emergency treatments, he was also certified as a battlefield medic. The regiment's overseas journey started on January 18, 1944, when it sailed to England and joined the 101st Airborne Division. The unit took up the codename Klondike as a security precaution after settling outside of Newbury. When the colonel ordered his troops to carry condoms when on leave in London, or anywhere else where prostitutes and sexual illnesses were common, Johnson and Father Sam's unease quickly turned into hostility. The soldiers helped themselves to a fishbowl filled with rubbers. When Father Sam objected, Johnson retorted, "Chaplain, you look after their souls, and I'll look after their asses." The priest became agitated. In a letter home, he added, "The morals in England are worse than you can possibly imagine. I'm fighting really hard to defend the conscience rights of our Catholic boys with our commanding commander. He's attempting to impose something that goes against our beliefs. I might lose my job if I object." The division chaplain, an Episcopalian colonel, was persuaded by the padre. A few weeks later, Father Sam wrote about Johnson once more. "He glares at me, even though I've won the first 2 rounds of our little feud." The chaplain retained his position, but the fishbowl vanished. As preparations grew for the Allied invasion of France, the weather was cold and rainy. Father Sam made his second water landing during the practice jumps, landing in a lake on 1 drop. The chaplain fell asleep in a ditch while on a night maneuver. Something chilly was pressing against his chin when he woke up. A serpent! He opened his eyes gently after giving it some thought. Johnson was holding a knife. "Chaplain, you would have been a dead duck by now in combat," he added. When Father Sam dismissed his assistants, Private James W. McDermott for persistently neglecting his responsibilities. Yet another ordeal ensued. In retaliation, the mischievous clerk took $85, about $340, from the chaplain's desk. While his wife was expecting back home, he ran away, threw a few inebriated parties, and proposed to an Englishwoman. McDermott ended up in the regimental stockade after spending almost all of the funds. The 101st carried out Exercise Eagle, a night drop on May 12, 1944, and a trial run for the division's role in the invasion of Western Europe a few days following the heist. Father Sam damaged his ribs after hitting a tree trunk on the way down. That night, the unit suffered 150 wounded, 90% of whom needed to be hospitalized. The defeats put an end to all of the hard training and practice jumps. A new helper, Private William A. France from Philadelphia, was introduced by the injured priest. Buck France, who was born into an Episcopalian family, had just become a Catholic. A month earlier, he and 6 other troopers had been baptized into the Roman Church by Father Sam. On May 28th, the regiment divided its forces between 2 airfields, marking the start of the last countdown to danger. They flew back and forth between Father Sam and his Protestant counterpart. Penance, the Padres boys confessing their 1,000 venial sins, and mass attendance both skyrocketed. In order to transport 13348 American paratroopers into combat, invasion architects put together 821 aircraft, excluding spares. There were only 13 chaplain jumpers. At Merrifield Airdrome, where the 441st Troop Carrier Group, led by Lieutenant Coles, Theodore G. Kershaw, was stationed, Father Sam was housed in a tent. Once the paratroopers understood they were going to Normandy, they were restricted inside the installation by barbed wire and armed guards. The operation was delayed by 24 hours due to rain and strong seas. Colonel Johnson spoke to his Merrifield unit on the eve of D-Day. With a Bowie knife raised over his head, he vowed to stab the foulest black-hearted Nazi bastard in France. Before the soldiers mounted their equipment and parachutes, he whipped them into savagery. A Red Cross brassard and 2 canteens, one with consecrated wine and the other medical alcohol, were among Father Sam's equipment. He used a musette bag to store holy objects. A chalice and a miniature ciborium, the latter of which protected consecrated wafers, were among the objects, along with cards bearing the Latin words for absolution and anointing the sick. He covered the items with his white vestments and altar linens. In addition, he had a blood plasma kit, a dispatch case, a large medical bag, a gas mask, and another musette bag filled with extra underwear and toiletries. His pockets were bulging with K-ration boxes. As the men made their way to the plane, he shook their hands and said, "God bless you," to each one. Father Sam led the troopers in prayer as they bowed their heads in his plane, their cheeks blackened with burnt cork. Aircraft roared down the runway, propelled into the air by their Pratt and Whitney engines. The planes gathered over southern England, climbing and circling in the last of the twilight. The lead ship arrived at the drop zone, DZ, which is less than an hour away, at 12:31 a.m. The chaplain lumbered to the open passenger door of his plane, loaded with equipment. He looked down at the moonlit whitecaps of the English Channel. His gaze strayed over an amazing scene. Too many naval ships rushing toward the invasion beaches. Father Sam examined the deadpan faces in the cabin, lost in the roar of the engines. He remembered that the men were generally quiet. A few tried to be casual by humming some contemporary songs, while others tried to sleep and smoke steadily. How many would live to see dawn again, he wondered. Pathfinders were on the ground ahead at the DZ. As they battled to set up T-lights and Eureka radar to aid in guiding the 441st, these elite warriors came under relentless German fire. The location was protected by the Germans, who had recognized it as a possible landing zone. A bigger issue loomed in the skies, but Father Sam, like everyone else in the air, had no idea what was going on the ground. The Normandy coast was overshadowed by a massive bank of clouds, a dangerous hurdle. The pilots climbed to 1,500 feet, the altitude required for the coastline crossing, while remaining locked in formation. The DZ was only 10 minutes away when the plane touched down close to Port Bail, France, and then sank into the clouds. In certain areas, visibility completely vanished. Many pilots were anxious. In an attempt to prevent collisions in midair, they broke formation. The plane swerved to the left and right. Some held their path, some climbed, and some dove. Through the dark soup, Lieutenant Colonel Kershaw saw straight ahead. The colonel and Father Sam's pilot remained together as they descended gently to the jump altitude of 700 feet. German anti-aircraft fire, however sporadic and inaccurate, blasted into the sky. Nevertheless, everyone became tense due to the booms and sparkles. Father Sam and the other passengers realized that there were only 4 minutes left to reach the DZ when a red caution light abruptly shone by the entrance. He saw First Lieutenant Ted Fuller, the jump master, haul himself to his feet and shout, "Prepare!" In accordance with his orders, the guys connected their static line fasteners to an anchor cable that passed above the cabin. They made one last check of their equipment. German gunners targeted the C-47 transport planes as they arose from the clouds, weaving a lethal web in the sky. As the tracer bullets exhausted themselves and dropped earthward, they painted long, blazing lines that disappeared as they crawled up into the night. Father Sam's plane was rocked by turbulent air, and bullets punctured its metal skin and flew through the floor. Technician 5th grade Stanley E. Butkovich was struck by one missile, which entered his left leg and pierced it. A medic named Waylon Lamb clambered to the injured man, who refused to stop. With his approval, Lieutenant Fuller unhooked Butkovich from the anchor cable and sat him down in the entrance with his legs hanging over the side. Butkovich was connected to the cable again by Fuller. Kershaw and his co-pilot in the lead plane looked for T-lights on the ground, which would indicate the location where the paratroopers should be given the all-clear to drop. The only thing the aviators noticed were flames leaping from a barn that the Germans had set on fire to light up the intruders. Kershaw turned on the green light because he believed the DZ was below. The pilot of Father Sam imitated. Butkovich was shoved out the door by Fuller. Bundles of equipment trailed behind him, followed quickly by his fellows. After entering prop blast, Father Sam fell until his parachute opened and its camouflaged canopy spread out over him. For a few period, he was awed by the deadly fireworks everywhere. He subsequently remarked, "How any of us survived will always be a mystery to me. In order to descend more quickly, I partially collapsed my chute. I entrusted myself to my guardian angel from that moment." His angel appeared to be the short straw. Father Sam fell into a drainage ditch that was inundated. He was dragged beneath the icy Black Sea by his bulky equipment. Fumbling for his knife, unable to find his feet, he cut away his religious artifacts, medical bag, plasma kit, and hygiene bag, but he was unable to escape a watery grave. His canopy remained open, and a blast of wind dragged him into shallow water, where he would have likely drowned. After a brief period of recovery, he removed his parachute gear. As he crawled back to the ditch and dove for his religious belongings, particularly eager to save the ciborium and its hallowed contents, German bullets flew over the marsh. He tried 5 or 6 times before he finally caught hold of the musette bag and dragged it to the surface. From his stick, he saw another man, Buck France, his assistant, who had almost drowned and lost his rifle. The two, now soaked, scurried to seek refuge in a hedgerow. They saw a C-47 flying toward them, with flames streaming from its left wing when they looked up. The pilot struggled to restore control as the dying bird came low. An orange fireball shot high into the sky as the plane exploded after pitching into a field. The 2 spectators said a prayer for the crew members who had died and were now roasting on the funeral pyre. In addition, the 2 prayed for the souls of 2 additional burning planes that shot like enormous bottle rockets over the far sky. 2 more 501st soldiers quickly crawled to their position and were located by Father Sam and his assistant. After considering their options, the 4 left, wending their way toward a location where they hoped to run into friendly people while hugging hedgerows. When they encountered 6 airborne soldiers, they were sent to a rally location via a detour. The path went over a huge marsh. When the Germans closed the lock gates on the Douve River in 1942, precipitation flooded the lowlands, making it impossible to launch an aerial attack. Father Sam's troop made their way across the swamp until they came under enemy fire close to Théophile Fortin's farm. the 506th Parachute Infantry's Protestant chaplain, Captain Tilden S. McGee, was the officer in charge of the aid station when the chaplain, acting alone, made his way to a modest cottage. Father Sam turned around and escorted his group to the residence. As he dropped, McGee, a Baptist theologian from Philadelphia, Mississippi, had just missed the church steeple in Angeville-Plain. He realized the irony of the near disaster and possibly the barely missed headline, "Chaplain Killed by Church." McGee had gone across the marsh from Angeville to assist in evacuating victims to the 14 home, where a dozen medics from the 506th and one from the 501st were assembled. The addition of Father Sam and his team was appreciated. The 3rd Battalion, 506th, dug in and guarded 2 wooden bridges across the Douve River, close to the aid station. With shells and bullets, the Germans on the other side of the river tore at the defenses. Father Sam saw a human tragedy when the farmer's wife, Odette Fortin, and an 8-year-old girl, Georgette Rivet, were killed by an enemy shell that struck behind the house when they went outside to obtain water from a pump. He remembered, "The farmer threw himself on their bodies and broke into agonizing sobs as I knelt to anoint them." The priest touched the guy in grief on the shoulder. With his face and hands covered in blood, he leaped to his feet instantly and sprinted in the direction of the Germans, screaming and clenching his fists. A number of people inside the aid station needed more treatment than was already provided. Father Sam made the decision to find a surgeon and the 501st Regimental Aid Station. Avoiding highways and enemy eyes, he headed off across the marsh by himself after consulting with McGee. He crept through icy water, sometimes breast deep, hidden by the swamp vegetation. In a hamlet called Basse-Atteville, he happened upon a friendly patrol that led him to high ground and the Klondike aid station. The timbre of the fire grew to a fast crackle as he plodded upslope toward his target and toward a firefight. At Basse-Atteville, the 501st men were up against German Army soldiers a hedgerow away. Foreign legionnaires, former Red Army soldiers from Soviet Georgia, were among the enemy. Technician 5th grade Norman L. Dick, a recent casualty from service company, was surrounded by GIs as the chaplain arrived at friendly troops. In a pocket, his own hand grenade had exploded. Regardless of the reason, the explosion turned his right leg into a bloody sluice, but someone believed a gunshot caused the accident. Norman was carried to the aid station by Father Sam. Inside the medical institution, a one-story house constructed in the 18th century, regimental surgeon Major Francis E. Carrel worked. With its fortress-thick walls built of stone and torches, a traditional building material consisting of clay and straw, the house appeared solid. The building was divided into individual houses by an inner wall. The one now occupied by American casualties was the home of Noémie Dioré. The 2 women sought shelter in the adjoining house, which belonged to her daughter, Maria Lebrulli. Maria's father, Noémie's first husband, had died in World War I, and her 2 brothers-in-law were infantrymen when the Germans invaded in 1940. One lost both legs, and the other perished in battle. The 2 women were aware of the suffering caused by war, but it had never previously erupted at their door. As Major Carrel treated patients in the small, cavernous institution, Father Sam found him. After hearing the chaplain's account, the doctor dispatched 2nd Battalion Surgeon Captain Clarence N. Sorensen, an enlisted man, and supplies to the 506th Aid Station. When Father Sam went back outside, he discovered Basse-Atteville's boss, Major Richard J. Allen, the regimental operations officer. Allen informed Father Sam that the Douve River locks at La Barquette, their unit's first target, were in Colonel Johnson's possession. The majority of the defenders from Basse-Atteville had left for the locks. Allen now commanded a rear guard of 50 men. Together with the chaplain, the medical personnel, and the ambulatory patients, these troops would depart at dusk. The destiny of the guys who were unable to walk was in German hands. Father Sam and Carol talked about the immobilized patients back at the aid station. The doctor advised against leaving them at this time. The Germans will view them as a liability, and neither side is currently taking many prisoners. Even if the military circumstances forced him to go, Father Sam declared his intention to stay, since he believed that abandonment was an unimaginable sin. Carrel recalled, "I tried to dissuade him, but he persisted. He believed that he had a duty to the men. Although the padre played down the danger, the doctor felt more at liberty to depart, but he was skeptical that anyone at the aid station would make it out alive. Each patient's condition, including PFC, was reviewed by the two men. Thomas L. Hildebrand, who was confined to Maria's cider room next door. Hildebrand, who jumped with Company D, 501st, sustained a severe concussion upon landing, leading to neuropsychiatric casualties such as incorrect memory, persistent headaches, and emotional outbursts. He should be kept apart from the others, Carell said. Another patient overheard the doctor's prognosis, and the chaplain and doctor also talked about young Norman Dick. He informed the chaplain that this man had little chance of getting better, but if he did, he would lose his leg. Calling his sergeant, Carell instructed him to choose a medic to stay with Father Sam. One of the paper slips that the sergeant ordered the medics to design had the word "stay" scribbled on it. Fisher, Private Everett L., remembered the lottery. I chose the stay slip because I was the first to draw. Fisher, 22, was born in Little Valley, New York, and dropped out of high school to work as a farmhand until being recruited in September 1942. The next month, he joined the 326th Airborne Medical Company. Fisher joined the 501st in jumping, and his unit placed men in each parachute regiment for the assault. It was at the aid station that he first met Father Sam. 2 rooms in Noemi's house were connected by an inside door. There were also outdoor doors leading out into the street from each room. The larger space served as both a sitting area with a fireplace and a bedroom. With a ladder leading to a loft, the smaller space functioned as a pantry. On time, the last withdrawal from Bass Adaville started. As the sun set and a full moon emerged, Major Allen led his rear guard, the medical staff, and the ambulatory patients across the swamp toward La Barquette. With more room in the aid station, Father Sam relocated all but 3 wounded into the spacious room. 14 patients were present. To observe Hildebrand, he positioned 2 individuals with injured legs adjacent to a door. Making a white flag out of a bedsheet, the chaplain hoisted it outdoors. He requested that Fisher forage for food. Rations left in the yard were returned by the medic. He also gathered eggs from the pantry and bottles of wine. Butter and milk were brought by an old Frenchwoman, most likely Noemi. The soldiers prepared scrambled eggs with crumbled crackers, protein, and carbohydrates for the patients using a 2-burner squad stove. In order to prevent infection, the medic and chaplain cleaned the wounds and applied sulfa powder. They gave patients who were moaning medication and changed their dressings. Norman Dick was kept alive by Father Sam's blood plasma, as was Corporal James F. Jacobson of Company C, 501st, who was lying on Noemi's bed. The 20-year-old corporal, a Chicago Catholic youth, suffered internal bleeding from a bullet hole in his thorax and a shrapnel-ripped bicep. His veins collapsed due to blood loss, and the chaplain had to make multiple efforts before he was able to properly infuse plasma. Cradling a wooden crucifix that Father Sam had taken from a wall, Norman Dick slumped on the floor in a corner. As the chaplain sat by his side and listened, he recovered sufficiently to share memories of his family after receiving 3 plasma units. According to Norman, his parents passed away during the Great Depression in St. Clairsville, Ohio, where he was raised. After completing high school, he relocated to Coalinga, California, where he resided with his sister and her spouse, before deciding to volunteer for the parachute infantry in September 1942. The former Ohioan, who had a passion for carpentry, worked as a cabinet maker. One of the 3 brothers who served in service received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart for his work as a B-24 Liberator bombardier over France. The majority of the men in the building were now asleep. Fisher fell asleep when Father Sam persuaded him to do the same. In an attempt to stop the enemy from attacking the aid station, the chaplain went back to the white flag and stood in the doorway, waving the sheet in silhouette. Every 15 minutes he did that. Meanwhile, he hovered around the patients, keeping an eye on them. Norman was a devoted Presbyterian, and he assisted him in saying his prayers. By the end of the day, Bass Adaville was undefended, and the Germans were not aware of it. Under the stars, the village lay in silence. The silence was infrequently broken by distant shelling, kilometers away, like rolling thunder. Until he heard a disturbance, Father Sam kept switching between the patients and the flag. The chaplain remembered, Norman went delirious at around 2 in the morning. I put his head on my arm and wiped sweat off his forehead on a regular basis. He would occasionally have a flash of insight and squeeze my hand. The chaplain urged everyone awake to join him in prayer for their buddy in a hushed voice. In spite of his own wounds, Jacobson Around 3:30 a.m., Norman Dick passed away. With Fisher's assistance, Father Sam curled his body into a parachute and put him outdoors. 2 hours later, as sunlight peeked over the eastern tree line, roosters cranked. The Germans were still not there, but Jacobson and the other injured soldiers were still alive. Fisher woke up and relieved Father Sam, who was practically sleepwalking. It was his first time sleeping since England, and he slept for 3 hours. The chaplain had barely enough time to gobble up the eggs and hot cocoa that the medic had prepared for him after his rest. The two angels in olive drab hurried to face the relentless work of caring for the casualties. Fisher felt sick to his stomach. He stated, "We had heard a lot of stories about what happened to American paratroopers when they were captured. At last, the Germans discovered that Bas-Adeville had been deserted by their adversaries. At 10:30 a.m., 6th Parachute Regiment enemy paratroopers arrived at the aid station. A wood frame window with a view of the street was scurried past by one enemy soldier. Sneak peeks through the gap showed a crew with a machine gun aiming its weapon close by. When the men heard shouts in German and a hammering on the pantry door, the tension reached a stomach-turning peak. Fisher was instructed to stay inside when Father Sam seized the white flag. With a shout of, "All right," the chaplain opened the door. "Hände hoch!" yelled an enemy paratrooper as he rammed a machine gun into the clergyman's midriff. Father Sam's hands went up. The priest pointed repeatedly to the Red Cross brassard on his left arm and a Christian cross on his collar as the Germans dragged him outside. There had never been an airborne chaplain among the enemy paratroopers. Their regiment didn't have one of them, and the Luftwaffe as a whole didn't have any chaplains because they had disbanded them years prior. He was pushed down the road at gunpoint by two young Germans with grim, antagonistic expressions. With his hands up, Fisher was told to go outside, while 3 further German paratroopers kicked open the door to the spacious chamber. He remembered, "A young German stuck a machine pistol in my stomach as soon as I stepped into the doorway." The boys on the floor looked away as it clicked, anticipating that I would be hit with a lot of lead. The enemy man moved away the machine pistol as Fisher lowered his left arm sufficiently to reveal his brassard. The Germans attempted to question their prisoners inside the aid station and scared them by shooting bullets into the ceiling. The Germans searched both rooms for food and weapons. They grabbed the rest of the eggs. Maria and Noemi were also roused by enemy forces. After searching Maria's house, the soldiers freed the women, who appeared harmless in their homemade costumes. Father Sam was marched a quarter of a mile by the 2 Germans before they stopped. He remembered that after one of them shoved him against a hedgerow, the 2 took 10 feet or so back and drew their rifles. When he saw the violence in their eyes, the blood drained from his face. In a nervous hurry, he recited the grace before meals instead of reciting the act of contrition. There were gunshots. A German non-commissioned officer was jogging down the street when the chaplain noticed him. He was shouting at his fellows after firing into the air. Father Sam was addressed in broken English by the attractive non-com. When he saw the priest's credentials, this German, old hair and seasoned campaigner, shoved one of the would-be assassins. The non-com's heels clicked like a pistol shot as he jerked to attention. With a small Prussian bow, he bowed at the waist and saluted. From beneath his uniform, the non-com pulled a medallion of the Sacred Heart. As his savior led him to an officer who called for a fluent English speaker, Father Sam was able to relax. The chaplain requested to stay with his injured soldiers and clarified that he had no military intelligence. The cop agreed. Fisher heard the shots back at the aid station and assumed the worst. He and the others thought they were about to be massacred, but they were mistaken. With the non-com by his side, their padre reappeared at the entrance. Father Sam appeared happy, even relieved. The non-com examined every part of the aid station, including the injuries sustained by each man. He said he would send a physician. The respect exhibited to Father Sam was a positive indication to the wounded. With his allies digging in at Bas-Adeville, the non-com left. The chaplain went back to work in the aid station, but he continued working alone. He requested that Fisher remain with Hildebrand. Father Sam was afraid the mentally ill soldier may give in to an animal instinct and run away, overwhelming his two wounded guards, so the Germans outside would shoot him. Father Sam helped the wounded guys limp back to the aid station. Since there was no more floor space in the spacious room, he put Corporal Elbert F. Yeager and Sergeant Lowell E. Norwood in the pantry. The two men were from Company B, 501st. Born and raised in Paris, Tennessee, Norwood had two small boys and a wife. Ted, his older brother, was a paratrooper as well. He was detained at Stalag du IB after being captured by the Germans in Italy the year before. Father Sam gave Norwood, Yeager, and the other patients hope. Their survival appeared plausible, even likely, as darkness descended on the countryside. The 101st Airborne Division was getting ready to retake Basse-Abbeville and take control of neighboring Saint-Côme-du-Mont that evening. The 65th Armored Field Artillery Battalion provided backup to the division after it lost a large portion of its own artillery during the D-Day drop. Codenamed Castle, the 65th touched down on Utah Beach. In the hamlet of Holdy was its Battalion Fire Direction Center, or FDC. 18 M7 priests, 105mm howitzers mounted on tank chassis, were deployed by the battalion. Outside the hamlet, the guns were positioned in 3 firing batteries. The unit was headed by Lieutenant Colonel Edward A. Bailey. During his visit to the 101st Command Post at the Licaudy Estate in Highsville in 1938, the West Point alumnus collaborated with the paratroopers to create an artillery strategy for the impending assault. They drew a sweeping barrage that would pass through pastures and orchards. Additionally, they chose 8 targets, referred to as concentrations, that encompassed enemy strongholds and intersections. Each was assigned a 3-digit number by the Castle FDC staff, who plotted them on a firing chart. One of the Klondike assistance stations was part of Concentration 402. The 65th started sporadic harassing fire around midnight, with the goal of preventing the Germans from sleeping and decreasing their ability to fight. Precise accuracy was not required, but the artillerymen lacked a forward observer to modify fire on the concentrations. There was plenty of information for harassing fire from battle maps and firing tables. Everyone in the aid station was startled awake by the first explosion at Basse-Abbeville. As they approached the building, more shots detonated and screamed in. Supersonic shock waves and sound levels above decibels were generated by the explosions. In anticipation of a direct impact, the injured gritted their teeth. Next door, Maria and Noemi huddled together, both women utterly afraid. After hammering away, the artillerymen quickly raised their guns and moved them to a different target. That evening, they made multiple trips back to 402. The chaplain visited Fisher and Hildebrand on a frequent basis and moved between the injured. Cocooned from reality, the concussion victim slept in a coma-like state. Private John C. Marney of Company D, 501st, who was one of the patients in the spacious room, remembers the chaplain's composure. Marney observed a guy who had dug deep inside to a protected corner and discovered grace, a man thankful to be where he was most needed, and an optimistic man amid the worst of situations. Father Sampson was just as calm as if nothing was happening. At least one German aircraft was drawn in by the muzzle flashes from the 3 artillery batteries less than 3 miles away. Near the guns, 2 explosives touched down but did not detonate. Ignoring the plane, the artillerymen carried on firing. They increased their firing to a continuous drumbeat about 4:15 in the morning. Shells hit Basse-Abbeville with a ferocity never seen before. Before an explosion pierced the darkness with a resounding crash and blinding light, the aid station had escaped a direct hit. Time stopped amid the unworldly miasma where the aid station's occupants were flung by the seismic blast between life and death. The walls and roof of the pantry were quickly destroyed by 3 blows. Father Sam flung himself over 3 individuals because he believed the vast room would collapse as well. Amazingly, there was no collapse. The chaplain's ears were ringing from the explosions, but he managed to hear someone yell his name. Corporal Yeager was the one. In the pantry doorway lay the 23-year-old Iola, Texas paratrooper. Jaeger was buried to the waist as more wreckage dropped, and Father Sam staggered to him through a dusty haze. The corporal's head was held in the chaplain's lap. He said, "They got me, Father." Father Sam felt the young man's heart pound vigorously for a minute before it stopped, and Jaeger groaned a few times as the padre turned and said, "Let's all pray for this boy." In the pantry was another man. The priest entered the chamber, rummaged among the rubble, and discovered Sergeant Norwood dead. Father Sam saw that a GI flashlight had been thrown onto the street by a shell burst among the chaos. He was afraid that an artillery observer may notice the light's dazzling little bulb. Shells exploded all around him, and he jumped outside to turn off the light. Father Sam heard the German defenders' frantic cries as the shelling confused them. He nearly bumped into one that sped by. He spotted a wounded enemy soldier in a flooded ditch as he leaned to catch the light. The chaplain tried to move the victim, but he died. When Father Sam saw a German leaning against the building brandishing an assault rifle, he turned around and went back inside. The owner was a wall-eyed cadaver, and the firearm was not dangerous. Just as a shell exploded close to the entryway, bringing down part of the building, the chaplain hurried into the spacious chamber. A German outside was hurt by the blast and cried out for assistance. Despite his desire to help, Father Sam was urged to remain by his patients. At 4:40 a.m., the artillerymen stopped firing, but only for 5 minutes. Upon their return, they opened fire in a huge volley in a box-shaped formation that faced the 1st Battalion, 401st Glider Infantry Regiment. High explosive shells launched earth fountains and ripped out holes in the ground. Projectiles of white phosphorus emitted toxic smoke and flames. The structure shook, but the aid station was outside the impact zone. The bombardment changed to a rolling barrage after 10 minutes, moving 100 yards every 4 minutes. As daylight returned to Normandy, glider troops pushed forward behind the bombardment. 2 jeeps and trailers carrying personnel and supplies from the 501st, the men sent to deliver the supplies to Johnson at La Barquette, were also part of the invading group. The force in jeeps was commanded by First Lieutenant Sumter Blackman. In response to hostile fire, he and his soldiers used 2 vehicle-mounted machine guns, grenades, and rifles. Private First Class John A. Houlihan, a jeep driver, was killed in the exchange. The men beat the structure with rifle grenades and had no idea of Father Sam's aid station. The aid station was also hit by bullets, and a bright red tracer bounced down from the ceiling and went through a broken window. It burned Father Sam's slacks after passing through them, and a wool rug. He put out the fire in a flash, but his groin was burned in the 2nd degree. The skin blistered and bubbled, but he ignored the discomfort and continued working after bandaging the wound. Blackman's soldiers quickly investigated every home as the German resistance waned, with the exception of the aid station, which did not receive any fire. Soon after, the lieutenant's group drove to La Barquette and handed over the goods. At 6 in the morning, the rolling barrage stopped, but small arms fire continued. Colonel Johnson gave Blackman the order to start evacuating victims at La Barquette. After loading injured troops into the trailers, the jeep teams started traveling to the 101st Surgical Facility at the Château de Colombière in Hiville. On the final ferry ride, Blackman found out about the wounded who had gone with Father Sam at Basse-Adaville. The trip was 10 kilometers round-way. Blackman made his way to the one house that had been overlooked before when the jeeps rushed back there. Its north and south ends were all that remained. Uncertain of what to anticipate, the lieutenant held a hand grenade as he drew closer. He went around to the back because the front door was blocked by masonry and shattered beams. Fisher yelled, "Americans in here!" upon spotting Blackman. To save another catastrophe, Father Sam ran outside and yelled. Blackman found out that 11 injured paratroopers had survived when the 2 officers met. He saw the chaplain's wound as well. Blackman remembered there was something wrong with his leg, and his trousers were in tatters. I inquired as to if he was harmed. "No, I was supposed to get these men out and take care of them," he claimed. The lieutenant clarified that although his 2 trailers were already full of injured men, he and the jeeps would be returning. He left Father Sam, who now had the squad stove back in working order, and looked about the ruined aid station. The return of the jeeps sparked sniper fire. PFC, Blackman's driver, was struck by one bullet, Roy L. Spivey, whose face was covered in blood due to a cut on his scalp. The two shooters were young parachute soldiers wearing camouflage smocks who quickly turned themselves in when his friends shot bullets into the foliage beside the road. It happened close to the aid station. Father Sam saw what happened next. With their minds shaped by a National Socialist schooling that turned them into hate machines fully devoted to Adolf Hitler, both captives bubbled with disdain. They spit their saliva on the floor and laughed at Spivey. Blackman's soldiers were infuriated at their arrogance. Private John T. Leitch, his radio operator, pointed a rifle toward the Germans. When Father Sam saw what Leitch was up to, he told him to stop, but Leitch continued to rid the two. The chaplain was appalled by the killing of unarmed men, even Nazi ideologues. He was compelled to file a lawsuit against Leitch, but that could wait. It was time for the survivors of the aid station to leave. Fisher and Father Sam assisted in carrying the most critically injured guys to the trailers first. Company C, 301st Private Floyd, H. Martin was wounded by machine pistol bullets to his shoulder and face. When he enlisted, he had lied about his birth date and was just 16. The aid station's battered roof astonished the young paratrooper. After leaving the house the following day, I can't understand how we managed to escape unscathed. Maria and Noemi also made it through the devastation of the structure. 3 back-and-forth trips to Heville were necessary for the evacuation. Until the last pickup, Father Sam remained at the aid station. Company D, 501st Second Lit. Elder B. Collier led a patrol into Bas Adeville to search for German holdouts as he waited. An enemy officer and his orderly were driven out of one residence by his soldiers. Later, Collier remembered the chaplain. He was obviously quiet, and he looked dirty and exhausted. In the final jeep, Father Sam left. He located Captain Joseph A. Durin, the Catholic chaplain with the 401st Glider Infantry in the Château de Colombière, a stone structure that resembled a medieval fortification. We provided assistance where we could, bringing the injured men inside, escorting them to the operating room, administering the last sacraments, and providing for their material needs, Durin remembered. Father Sam responded to an urgent demand for type O blood, the universal blood group, just an hour after his arrival. A soldier with a rare blood type and an abdominal wound received 2 quarts from him as he rolled up his sleeve. He sent me to bed at 02:30, Durin remembered. Among the wounded, the 501st chaplain continued to work alone, taking catnaps when he could, before a lieutenant from his regiment arrived with wounded men at noon on June 9th and brought him to Vierville, where Colonel Johnson gathered the regiment. He was employed at the chateau. Father Sam was given bedding by 2 paratroopers who excavated a foxhole and filled it with a parachute. A German plane dropped 3 bombs close by as he fell into the downy nest, but he was too tired to notice, he later explained. It couldn't have prevented me from falling asleep even if the entire German Luftwaffe had arrived. I slept for a full 24 hours. The 501st combat concluded in mid-June, and in July, its survivors took a ship back to England. The troops that were lost were replaced by new recruits for the unit. After a captain passed away from injuries, First Lieutenant Richard Engels joined regimental headquarters and assumed the position of personnel officer. His assistant was First Lieutenant Lawrence S. Critchell, Jr. The 2 newcomers were in charge of decorations and prizes, among other things. For Major General Maxwell D. Taylor's approval, the 2 forwarded Bronze Star and Silver Star proposals to division headquarters. He was the only one with the power to decide on these embellishments. Additionally, Colonel Johnson nominated 10 troops for the Distinguished Service Cross, DSC, the second highest award in the country for combat gallantry. Higher headquarters in Europe made the final choices on them. Additionally, Johnson requested that Critchell and Engels draft a proposal for the Medal of Honor. As word spread across the regiment about Father Sam's actions, the colonel's perspective on his Catholic chaplain was altered. Among the qualities that Johnson admired most were the Padre's selflessness and his disregard for his own survival. Johnson had more respect for no guy in the regiment after Normandy. According to Army Regulation 645, a recommendation for a Medal of Honor must include incontestable proof, Jan writing, namely eyewitness affidavits. Survivors of the aid station who are currently in England gave Engels sworn testimony. Critchell went to interview Jacobson and get his statement in the 81st General Hospital in Cardiff, Wales. A dozen affidavits were gathered by the two lieutenants. Private Val B. Suarez, the regimental draftsman, drew a map, and Critchell composed a 3-page narrative that told the entire affair. On August 7th, Johnson sent General Taylor the recommendation. He quickly approved it, but only for the DSC, a lesser honor. A Medal of Honor could not be approved or disapproved by Taylor himself. That privilege was restricted for the War Department. The commander of the division could simply express an opinion. Additionally, regardless of his personal opinion, the War Department mandated that the division commander forward the recommendation up the command chain. Taylor obeyed. "I have been nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor," Father Sam wrote to his family. "I know the honor of being recommended will make you as happy as it surprised me." On August 18th, the suggestion made its way to 1st Army Command. After reviewing the documentation 7 days later, the Awards and Decorations Board decided in favor of the DSC, with the 3 colonels on the board concurring with Taylor. Father Sam sent home another letter on September 1st. "My previous mail regarding a minor issue did not get through. I regret to inform you that it has been replaced with the Distinguished Service Cross, which is far more impressive than anything I may have accomplished in combat." The procedure was misinterpreted by the chaplain. There had been no definitive decision. After reviewing the suggestion, 1st Army Chief of Staff Major General William B. Keane wrote a brief message. "Ask the board to reconsider for MH. I might be mistaken, but I think it's powerful enough." 2 colonels switched their votes to Medal of Honor when the board met again on September 2nd. Lieutenant General Courtney H. Hodges, the 1st Army commander, then approved the recommendation and nodded for the Medal of Honor. The documents were forwarded by his staff to Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley at the headquarters of the 12th Army Group. Father Sam and the 101st went back to fighting, while the documents moved from desk to desk. The Padre plunged into a Dutch castle moat, making his 4th water landing. On October 8th, Colonel Johnson passed away due to an abdominal wound from a shell fragment. The chieftain with the steely eyes became legendary. He had turned his paratroopers into deadly weapons of mass devastation, yet the only guy he thought deserving of the Medal of Honor was a priest, a man without a weapon, without a sense of confidence, without a killing instinct. The Medal of Honor was recommended for approval by General Bradley's board the week following Johnson's death. Bradley added his signature in agreement. General Dwight D. Eisenhower supported the recommendation and sent it across the Atlantic in November. Shortly after Thanksgiving, the paperwork reached the Pentagon. Critchell's story and the affidavits were examined by the War Department Decorations Board. Major General Emory S. Adams, the board president, declared the vote, Medal of Honor, on November 28th. General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, received the file folder containing the documents for his final approval. The top Army general untangled himself from a maze of paperwork and decisions by giving subordinates a lot of responsibility. He made an exception for the award, but concentrated on matters that affected the fate of the war. He examined each request for its award, approving or disapproving his Decorations Board's suggestion. He could only be overruled by the President or Secretary of War, and they hardly ever did. Unwritten policies contributed to the process, even though it was overseen by an Army order. According to one rule, chaplains and medical professionals who were non-combatants shouldn't be included in the ranks of Medal of Honor recipients. As the war went on, General Marshall relaxed the rule and allowed 5 combat doctors to be awarded the medal, but he remained steadfast in his support for chaplains. Father Sam's Distinguished Service Cross was lowered by him. On December 6, 1944, a staff officer noted the decision without providing a reason. 4 additional chaplains had their Medal of Honor recommendations downgraded to the DSC that same month. When their ship sank in 1943 after a German submarine attack, the 4 men, 2 Protestants, 1 Jewish, and 1 Catholic, had perished together after donating their life jackets to other passengers. Father Sam and the drowned clerics were the only Americans. During World War II, Army chaplains were nominated for the Medal of Honor. See? On December 20th, while looking for casualties during the Battle of the Bulge back in Europe, Father Sam was captured by the Germans. He was declared lost in combat by the Army. Through the International Red Cross, he wrote to his family in February 1945. While incarcerated at Stalag XIA, the Army organized a DSC presenting ceremony by getting in touch with his father in Portland, Oregon. On behalf of his kid, his father was presented with the award. In late April, Soviet forces took control of Stalag 2A. Due to a chaplain shortage, Father Sam returned to active duty in 1946 after traveling home and leaving the military. During the Korean War, he performed his 5th water landing and his last combat jump with the 11th Airborne Division. No Army chaplain was awarded the Medal of Honor during the 3-year fight. The standard was still too high for them to meet. After dedicating his life to the military, Father Sam rose to the rank of Major General in 1967 and was appointed Chief of Chaplains, the highest position in the U.S. Army chaplain. The general held a position of authority at the top of the Pentagon. The fact that an Army chaplain was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1968 for saving 20 injured soldiers in Vietnam was no accident. The medal, a posthumous honor given to a paratrooper padre murdered in Vietnam, was given to another Army chaplain the next year. After leaving the service in 1971, Father Sam served as the national president of the USO for 2 years. He later moved to South Dakota and joined the Sioux Falls Diocese as a parish priest. He stayed there until 1983, when he agreed to take a job as the president's special assistant for ROTC affairs at the University of Notre Dame. His recommendation for the Medal of Honor was not widely known. He left it out of his published memoir, along with all references to honors and decorations, but he told Sergeant Major Francis X. Boyle, Jr., Notre Dame's head ROTC instructor, about it in 1986. The sergeant major was so taken aback by the narrative that he wrote to Senator Dan Quayle requesting a congressional inquiry to address what Boyle saw as an injustice. The senator looked into it, and the U.S. Military Awards Branch responded politely. Center for Army Military Personnel. The answering commander clarified that the Army lacked the authority to disregard the statutory restriction that Congress had placed on Medal of Honor, awarding for actions during World War II in 1952. The reply also clarified that the Army would be presumptuous to randomly evaluate the general's subjective judgment after so many years, given General Marshall personally made the decision in Father Sam's case. Boyle dropped the subject grudgingly. He passed away at the age of 50, 2 years later. Although he periodically filled in when a local priest was absent or ill, the chaplain returned to Sioux Falls in 1987 after retiring once more. Father Sam lived in a little wood frame home that had belonged to his maternal grandparents and spent a modest but contented retirement. In addition to donating money to construct a school chapel, he underwrote the tuition for nearby families who did not have his pension or assets. Because of his spiritual beliefs and thrifty lifestyle, the former general didn't spend much on himself. His one luxury was cigars. In his youth, he smoked pipes, then cigarettes, and finally cigars, including slim cigarillos and fat stogies. His twilight years were cut short by cancer. On January 28, 1996, he passed away under hospice care. A few months later, Congress allowed the U.S. to take advantage of an exception to its legislative ban. Reversing an unwritten policy that fostered prejudice against them, the Army will now give medals of honor to soldiers who were refused the honor during World War II due to their race. A DSC posthumously given to a Catholic priest during the Korean War was upgraded by the Army 17 years later, but there was no prior denial for that Medal of Honor. General Marshall's disapproval's reasoning is still unknown. Although Marshall was an Episcopal Church member, his writings throughout the war show a greater regard for Catholic chaplains than many of their Protestant counterparts. His assessment of Father Sam was not influenced in any way by his denomination. Both the chaplain and the general were morally comparable. Both guys, who were fundamentally altruistic, suppressed their egos, disapproved of vanity, and refused favors. Self-denial was like a pair of cozy shoes. Was it the general's opinion that the Medal of Honor went against the serious pledges of individuals whose profession conflicted with celebrity and self-gratification? Father Sam was spared all the pomp and hero adoration that usually accompanied the medal, regardless of the reasons behind the 1944 decision. He believed that only the Almighty was worthy of worship, and that honors should be bestowed upon others. The lives saved were always more important than the medal. The Dead of Winter, written by Bill Warnock in 2005, details current efforts to locate lost American soldiers who died during the Battle of the Bulge. The Army Historical Foundation awarded him a 2010 Distinguished Writing Award. While researching his latest book, which is a history of the U.S. 751st Tank Battalion during World War II, Bill happened to come upon the Medal of Honor documents created by Engels and Critchell. A desire to discover the story told here was sparked by the yellowed and neglected pages